Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome again back to another interesting episode of Pathways to the Ivies. Today on our show is another special guest who has busted myth on another level. We have the brilliant Anay Garodia, the guy who's actually managed to crack an Ivy League university, which is Columbia University, as a part of his early decision process in applied physics. But the part that stands out on his application, besides all the brilliant things that he's done, is that he is not an IB kid. He has done the regular ICSE board from India and has managed to convince the entire world that the ability to achieve anything in life lies in your hands. It's independent of which board you study in, which country you live in, which state you live in, or the resources you have at your disposal. So, Anai, first of all, super proud of you for your fantastic achievement. This is amazing. And welcome to the show. How about you go ahead and give a two-line introduction about yourself to all of our viewers and listeners and tell them who you are as a person outside of all the laurels that are resting on your shoulder and we're going to talk about in the podcast.
Hello, I am Anay Garodia and I am an incoming freshman at Columbia. I applied for physics, but I'm currently planning to switch to mathematics. I used to study at Martiniere for boys in Kolkata, and I recently completed my ISC examinations. Aside from studies, I love to play table tennis, football, and I also support Manchester United, which hasn't been going great recently.
Perfect. My brother's a Liverpool fan, and I'm only a Manu fan because Liverpool and Manu hate each other's guts. So I just want to oppose him, but that's another piece of advice. Sorry. Um, Not digressing. So first of all, congratulations on the admit. That's fantastic. Now, the biggest thing when I was looking at your resume, which is pretty long and super elaborate, that stands out for me is that you are an ICSE student. We've done these podcasts with so many kids around the world. And a lot of them either continue to be in American high schools or IB schools. But you, despite having this trend, continue to do and pursue your ISC, which is an extension of ICSE. And again, you reason to our viewers and listeners, one, why did you choose to do this? And two, does it have any merit in, the fact that if you take IBDP, you have an advantage over ICSE students?
Okay, so in grade 11, I had a choice between moving to IB or continuing with ISC. I sort of wish to move to IB, but after discussion with my parents, they also reason that if I stay in my current school, I already know my teachers very well and I'll have better overall opportunities because I won't have to spend around a year making new friends and making new connections with my teachers. So that's kind of why I decided to stay in my current school and continue with the ISC program. Also, according to the merits of the IBTP program, I think it gives a few more opportunities. But if you are in an ISC school and you have the ability to find opportunities yourself, I don't think any sort of hold. It's not holding you back in any sort of way. Even from my school, there are a few IB admits every year, and I don't think there's any sort of negative connotation of going to an ISC school because in Kolkata, most of the schools are ISC and there are very few IB schools currently here.
So, just to reiterate what you're saying, if a student decides to continue working in an ISC medium, that won't hinder a student's chances to get into an IB?
I don't think it does if the student is proactive themselves and goes out and find those sort of opportunities themselves that would come naturally in an IB school, sort of like different competitions and stuff that are not inherently present aside from MUNs.
Perfect. And I think that's true for even IB school. I think sometimes just IB school, if the counseling side of the school is really out there, then they bring those opportunities to school, which probably the ISC may not. But as you rightly said, the board is not a deterrent. You can be an IB board or an ISC board student, and you can still make it to one of the top schools. Now, then my next question is, I see you are an AP scholar with an honor. You've taken four APs, which is Calculus BC, Mechanics ENM, I'm sorry, Physics ENM, which is Electricity and Magnetism, and Mechanics and Computer Science, all four of them being five. First of all, can you explain what is an AP scholar
So
to
I
all of
believe
our
an
viewers?
Yeah, I believe an AP scholar is a person who has 3 or 4 AP5s. I'm not sure about the exact number, But after you get a number of AP fives, then you automatically get that award from the college board. um, as for the number of APs I took, I didn't find them very hard because our class 11 and 12 science uh, courses from the JE, and it's much harder compared to the syllabus we cover in APs. So that was sort of like 1 month of studies, and it was a pretty easy five in all four cases.
And do you think taking APs for an ISE student kind of puts you on the same level ground as IB? Because I've heard that IBHL is the same as AP and getting a 5 on AP. So you think get do for IC students doing an AP is mandatory, or should they do APs? Does it put you at advantage in the admissions process?
So I'm not sure about mandatory, but I do think it gives you an advantage because the admissions officer from the US actually knows what kind of what stuff you have studied in an AP exam. So they know what kind of background you are coming from when you're applying there. They may not be very familiar with what you have exactly studied in ICSE and whether you have the English ability to actually go over there and study in that university. For APs, colleges also give you college credit, which is very worth it. So an AP exam is definitely worth it as an ICSE student because there are no credits that transfer from ICSE to the colleges over in the US.
Perfect. Is there a certain rationale that a student should be using while choosing their AP exam courses? Because like you've done you've done math and you've done physics and you've done computer science. So, is there a certain rationale, and how soon should a student start thinking about AP exams if they were to go abroad?
So in my school, we didn't really think about what we needed to do to grow abroad before class 11. So I do think that if you're in an ICSE school and you are definitely set on going abroad, so you should start as soon as possible. If you're in class 9, it's better to just start at that point than waiting till till after your ICSE board and then beginning. It gives you an advantage because if you have a few APs already, then you have that assurance that you will get this certain number of college credits already, and you won't have that pressure in class 12 that you need to get 5 AP5s if you want to get this number of college credits. Everyone in class 12 gets very caught up in their APs because it's back to back and there are a huge number of APs. Like most of my friends had 3 or 4 APs in the same week. So it gets very hectic at that point of time. So if you can give any number of APs early on, it's better.
So you're suggesting that a ninth grader can also go and take a few APs and then possibly distribute the APs across the 4 years of your high school, just so that you have advantage. And of course, you can probably take more number of APs, in your high
Yeah.
school. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I've not found the APs to be very hard. For example, if there is a certain, for example, if you have covered calculus like derivatives and stuff in class 11, you can definitely take Calc BC in class 12. The ISC curriculum is, I believe, harder than what the AP covers. So if you are an ISC student, the APs shouldn't be a very big problem compared to what the curriculum actually is that you are studying.
Perfect. And I see you've taken the SAT and you actually managed to score a 1590, which is nearly the perfect score, which is fantastic. But I wanted to understand your take on going test optional versus not taking it. Generally, like, I mean, I'm sure you've submitted 1590. There's no way you wouldn't. But what's your general take on going test optional to all these competitive universities, especially for STEM programs, which is, I think, literally a bloodbath out there?
Okay, so for tech STEM programs, I think it's pretty good if it's almost compulsory that you submit your SAT if you have anything over a 1400, then you definitely should submit your SAT because otherwise they'll think that you got a 1200 or 1300, which is definitely worse. If you got somewhere below a 1400, then it becomes a question mark whether you should submit or not. And it's generally always better to submit your SAT score if it's above a certain point like 1350, 1400. For tech, for most schools right now, it is almost a necessity to submit, and many schools are going test compulsory right now. I think Columbia and Princeton are the only Ivy schools that are test compulsory from next year. So it's always better to take the SAT multiple times if you haven't gotten a good score right now because you can always super score and try to get that 1400, 1500, so that you can actually go ahead and submit.
Absolutely. That's a great insider point. How early should somebody start preparing for SAT? Because I think the most common problem that I see usually with STEM kids and otherwise is scoring in English. Math is, I know 800 is fairly easy, but getting that 790, which I'm assuming that you had 800 on math and 790 in English. What's your
Yeah.
take on helping students just generally? How early should they start preparing? Things that they can keep in mind when they're looking at getting a higher score on English per se.
So for SAT English, one of the critical things is understanding the basic grammar rules, because the one of the only things that you can actually improve in SAT English from starting to ending is the grammar portion, because raising your marks in in the understanding portion with the long passages is quite hard. It comes down to a practice of reading. Whereas in the grammar portion, if you understand the basic grammar rules, which are like 5 or 10 or rules regarding when to use commas and when to use full stops, that really raises your score by 50 or 100 points in the English section. So, in terms of the longer passage ones, one thing that would help is to try to understand what patterns the SAT comes up with regularly. For example, there are a number of passages that came up in the practice tests that I gave earlier and also on my actual SAT. So, I sort of knew what kind of answer they were expecting. So that really helps.
Right. So just practice and work on your grammar, because
Yeah.
that's a very tangible income. The rest can only be improved with practice. And another thing that I'd add to what Anna is saying is, please don't shy away from taking multiple attempts. I don't know where some people think you can only take one try or two tries or three tries. There's this, I don't even think it's a rumor, but somebody started it and everybody thinks you can only take like X tries. Guys, you can take as many tries to the SAT as possible, and it does not work against you. I am emphasizing that this does not work against you. The higher the score, the better it is, whether it's your first try score or your fifth try score, it doesn't matter, right? That's something that I really want people to know. So, Anai, one of the most interesting projects that I found while I was looking at your resume is the research paper based on regions formed by regular polygons. It also says that you invented a formula and worked with a professor at MIT. That is so cool. Can you let all of our viewers and listeners know, how did you go about working on this? Things that you learned in the process. How did you go about doing it? Consulting folks from MIT. Wow, that is amazing. If you can just elaborate on this and let all of us know, I would really love that.
So once I was scrolling through YouTube Shorts when I came across a three blue one brown short on the Moses circle paradox, and I found that very interesting. So it is a paradox about extrapolating patterns. So there's a paradox called Moses circle in which there's a pattern that follows like 2, 4, 8, 16, and then you have to guess the next number, and it turns out to be 31 instead of 32. So there is a different formula instead of 2 to the power n. So I spent like a good 2 to 3 hours after watching that short trying to figure out why that happens. So when I was doing that, I thought about a few more things, like few different things that we could do that would make the problem much more complex, and whether someone has actually found any solution to that. After that, I spent like a good 2 to 3 months trying to figure out my the own problem I had created. After spending a good 3 to 4 months trying to figure that out, I came across a research paper that actually had solved that problem completely. And I was shocked when I found that the research paper was from 1999 only. The problem was very recent and had not been solved earlier. After that, I spent a good another 1 or 2 months with one of my friends trying to figure out different variations that we could try on that problem. And we discovered 2 or 3 more formulas, and we talked to the author of the original paper from 1999, who is an MIT professor called Bjorn Poonen. He's very famous. He's a four-time Putnam winner, and he actually agreed to review our paper for publication.
Wow. So you found something on YouTube and you decided to actually do a passion project research by yourself. And then you reached out to the person who had originally created the problem to ask him or to vet out the solution with him. Like, oh, this is what the solution was. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
Wow. And how did you get in touch with the professor? I mean, I'm sure he must be getting like 1,000 emails. How did you get him to respond to you?
So there were two original authors to the research paper. We actually tracked down a lot of professors from different institutions. We found their email on their websites and we mailed a lot of professors. We got responses from an IIT Bombay professor and also the original Bjorn Poonen from MIT who had written the original research paper. We did not get a response from the other author. And we sent out like around 40, 50 cold mails. and got like 4 responses. So, but in terms of cold mailing, that's still pretty good.
Oh, it's amazing. It's a 10% response rate. That's as good as, a webinar conversion rate. That's pretty high, trust me. So, but kudos on that. You did an amazing job, and, I am so proud of you for the experience that you kind of did. And that's kind of really, really amazing. My next question to you is what we started out earlier, which is the mathematics behind fusion parameters. While you were talking that, I kind of found that interesting. And, if you can just elaborate a little bit more about that research as well, because I also feel that piece of information is really cool. So yeah, if you can just let us know a little bit more about it.
So around class 11, I had decided that I was going to major in physics, and I decided to take part in the Polygens Research Program, which is a program that connects PhDs, scholars, and professors with high school students and allow them to take part in a research project. So the mentor I got matched with had done previous work in nuclear fusion and was actually a part of a company that was trying different nuclear fusion products. So after I got matched with my mentor, I started researching a bit more about nuclear fusion and got much more interested in it as a potential solution to climate change and global warming. And it is a very emerging field. It has not had a lot of success in the past 30-40 years, but it could potentially change the world. So I got very interested in it. As part of the Polygens research program, we conducted simulations on Python on the nuclear fusion model, and we tested out different reactor models. And we also discovered a new material called octalithium plumbate, which was very promising as a future breeding blanket layer material, which is a material that is critical in the functioning of a DT fusion reactor. So I had a lot of fun in that project because we could test out different models, and I could do real scientific work while sitting on my desk while using only a sort of broken laptop instead of having instead of having access to supercomputers and stuff that is actually required.
All right, so this is pretty fantastic. I also see you have a lot of co-curricular activities and achievements, but the one that I like the most is the INSSDC, which is Indian National Space Settlement Design Competition. Can you elaborate on what did you do, how did you do, and how your current school students are actually going to NASA? That is kind of very, very cool. So why don't you go and let our viewers and listeners know about it?
So in class 11, I came to know about a competition called the Indian National Space Settlement Design Competition that takes place in Delhi every year, in which different high school teams are selected and come to Delhi to actually design a futuristic space settlement. You have to do everything from designing how they'll get their food, to how the waste disposal system work, to how the actual settlement will be designed. So it is a very complicated and very interesting competition. So I got to know about this competition in grade 11, and our school does not take part in a lot of STEM activities outside of fests and stuff. So I talked to my science club teacher and convinced them to allow our school students to actually try to participate in this competition. And then I assembled a team of 5 more students from my school, and together we put together a 60-page proposal. We have to create a qualifying proposal before we actually get selected to participate in the nationals. So we put together a 60-page proposal about a futuristic settlement in on the moon. So we get a sort of written PDF that has all the requirements that a future settlement would need, and then we have to create a proposal in response to that satisfies all the requirements. So we put together that 60-page proposal about this future settlement on the moon, and we sent it in, and we qualified as the first runners up. And then we went to the actual competition, and we in the competition we got 23 hours. uh, we we were put together with 5 other teams, and so we had a total team strength of 60, and we got 23 hours, and we stayed up for the entire 23 hours, and we had to create a 40-page presentation that we had to deliver over 45 minutes. So the competition was a lot of fun and took a lot of work on our part, and overall that helped my application also, I think. So after I completed my round of the competition, I also organized a team for the juniors. I helped with the selections and trained them to take part in the competition themselves. They took part in the Indian nationals, they came second, then they took part in the Asian nationals. They won that, and they are going to NASA this year.
That's pretty audacious. I mean, from where you started out convincing your school to actually have somebody after your batch, leaving that baton, carrying that baton forward, leaving that legacy behind is kudos to you. I mean, amazing job, and
Thank
I think another thing that I usually when I talk to kids and I talk to admissions officer also, and I kind of figure that out is, people who kind of do exceptional work and bring in something that didn't exist. So, like your school wasn't ready to support you in this competition and how you led that. I had this one girl I was talking to, she was from North Dakota in the US, and her school never administered AP exams. Like it was not a center, and they didn't have AP subjects. And how she took that on her, she convinced her school coordinator and a principal, and eventually it took her a couple of years. Like by the time she graduated, the year she was to graduate, that was the day AP exams came in, and unfortunately she couldn't talk about, like, she couldn't take the AP exams, but her entire common app essay was about her effort to do, like, be a leader and do something for people behind and leave that legacy. And what you said, literally this reminds me of that, and I think that itself is a great piece of leadership. And I think everybody who's watching and listening, you should pay attention that leadership is not necessarily like leading in the sense of being a literal leader. It's also putting something into place that is not in place so that people behind you would be benefited. So kudos with that, and super super nice. Another co-curricular activity that I really liked was your beamline for school competition, which is BL4S. If you can just talk a little bit more about that, and
Okay, so Beamline for Schools is a competition that is hosted by CERN every year. So I think a few thousand schools around the world participate in this competition. And as a part of this competition, you have to create a proposal to use CERN's own accelerators and their own equipments in a way that actually solves some problem or creates some experiment. So the one of the part of this competition is to actually create a viable particle physics experiment, and that is a very challenging thing to do as a high school student. So you have to form teams of up to 12 members and design your own particle physics experiment. So it was a very cool experience, and we created uh, a uh, pretty difficult experiment that I don't think was physically viable, and we did not actually end up going to CERN. But every year, I think two or three schools from around the world are chosen to actually conduct their experiments at CERN, and it is just a very cool competition to take part in if you are enthusiastic about conducting science research. So as a part when we were actually participating in this competition in school, we went to the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, which is located near my home. It's in Kolkata. So there are actual researchers who collaborate with CERN regularly, and we talked about our idea with them, and they actually gave us feedback on what we were designing. So it was just the entire process was very cool because we got to research and understand how accelerators work, how experiments are actually conducted at CERN, and we also got experience about dealing with teams and stuff. So it was very difficult also to coordinate such a large team of 12 members.
and to add to what you're saying, right, another thing that I would like the viewers and listeners to know is that not every competition that you participate in you have to be a winner or a runners up. As Anai rightly said here, he couldn't make it to the finals also. He just probably wasn't there, and that does not harm your application. I think the fact that he was able to participate and coordinate a team of 10 people and get that idea out there is enough for a college application. It does not have to be like, oh, you're a winner, and if you are not a winner, you're nowhere. Please, guys, the effort counts. The outcome, if it works in your favor, great. But if it doesn't, that is also okay. Absolutely. Perfect. And then talking about a couple of your academic programs, you've done SUMAC, you've done Euler's Circle, and you've also done a few expository papers. Can you talk to us a little bit more about both Sumac and Euler's Circle? What did you do, and should somebody who's looking to study mathematics do these as well?
Okay, so I'll start with Euler Circle because that was the first program I actually took part in. I started participating in Euler Circle in class 11, and that was probably one of the reasons why I like math as much as I do, and it Euler Circle is an introduction to proof-based math. So what we are taught in high school is computational math, and it is very different to the math that we do in at the university level. So at the university level, you are actually expected to do a lot more proofs than compute some integral. So many university students realize this when they take their first class of real analysis, which is a lot more rigorous than your average high school level math. So Euler Circle is a great experience. If you, but the one of the things that holds it, Euler Circle overall is a great experience for any high school student. I definitely recommend anyone interested in math to consider taking part in it. And the person who runs it, Simon, is also a great person, and he knows what he is doing. He has a PhD in math, and he teaches very well. And the books that they provide are very well written, and it's not super expensive. So one of the drawbacks of US based programs is that they happen at 5:30 a.m. in the morning on school days. But if you like math enough and you are able to get through that obstacle, I would definitely recommend that you participate in a program like this.
How about Sumac?
Yeah, so SUMAC is a different sort of program. It is a summer program that is organized by Stanford, and it takes place in June, and is I think it is competitive. So there is an application process for it. You need to solve an admissions exam that is also super difficult. So it took me around 4 or 5 days to actually get through the admissions exam, and I had to spend around 40 or 50 hours to actually type up like 10 problems. So the problems are super hard, and I got waitlisted first before being accepted. So after I got waitlisted, I had an option to submit additional documents. So as part of the additional documents, I submitted like a 170-page PDF of all the proofs I had done for Euler Circle, and I think that actually ended up helping me get into the program. So the program was 1 month long, and we had to do math for 10 hours a day for 5 days a week. So every day we had to solve 10 problems in math, like as a problem set, and we had problem set discussions and guest lectures. We had everyone from sort of a Jane Street quantitative researcher who was working in finance to a physics researcher to a professional mathematician give guest lectures. And the math was also super advanced. It was sort almost graduate school level group theory, and it got pretty complex pretty fast, and it was a lot of fun. We spent around 3 hours every day on a lecture. Then we spent 3 hours discussing problems. There were very fun guest lectures that was everything related to relativity, and then there was a guest lecture on wallpaper patterns in math. There was a guest lecture on partitions, which is a very interesting problem that Ramanujan solved. So there was a ton of things that happened over just 1 month, and it was pretty advanced, but it was pretty fun.
That's good. Now let's go to the last one or two questions, and this one will actually talk about essays. Like, the most dreaded topic, the most dreadful topic for a lot of students when you're applying is writing those essays. Columbia is at least, I think, 4 or 5 essays, not very sure about it. But I wanted to understand A, your approach to writing these essays, and B, what can a student do to produce effective essays, because as we all know, essays make or break your applications. Despite having all these laurels, if your essays are not there, you're not going to make it. So can you just elaborate on your essays and the process that generally somebody can follow to write essays that are good essays?
Okay, so I also hated the process of writing all these essays, and I spent maybe a month writing my personal statement because I word thought it so many times, and I wrote so many drafts on different topics before I actually ended up with a draft that I sort of liked, which I ended up submitting. So one of the things I would suggest is to just keep writing drafts after drafts, especially when it comes to your personal statement. You need to keep editing your personal statement, because the first personal statement I write, I did not like it. Then I changed something and I still did not like it, and I kept changing and changing till I actually ended up with something that I could potentially submit to the university. I overthought my essays a lot. So one of the benefits of getting in early admissions is that you don't need to write sort of 40 more essays for the regular decision process. So that made me really happy. So Columbia asked for 5 essays, and they are very short, so it was okay answering them. One of those is listing books or films that you have watched, or books that you have read, or journals that you have read. And so I listed everything from actual proper books like Gödel, which is a very famous math book, to listing YouTube channels like Three Blue One Brown or Vsauce, or even Last Week Tonight by John Oliver. So the Columbia essays, and in general the IVS, some IV essays are not very long, and those short essays are fine to write. They still get pretty cramped up in because you need to put a lot of information in a very short space. But I think if you just focus on telling one story instead of cramming everything in like 150 words, it turns out to be a much better essay overall.
Perfect. And I think I like the idea that, it's not all packed in together. You're strategically thinking what you're going to put in this essay, and then what you're going to put in the next essay, and then what you're going to put in the next essay. But that's good to know. What was your topic for Common App? Very curious, because I'm very, very curious on, what topics kind of make, a student get into an IV. And I'm sure every other viewer and listener is also. Was it a narrative? Was it a montage? What did you talk about? Like, I'm talking about your final draft, not what it evolved into, or
Yeah.
what you started out with.
So I ended up writing on vitiligo, which is a skin disease that I have, which you can probably see here. I have white patches across my skin, so I ended up writing. I actually contracted this disease when I was 4 or 5, and this is not curable. And I spent around 12 years trying different cures like Ayurveda and allopathy and stuff. So I talked about the entire journey of having this disease as a child, and how my parents actually thought of it as a problem, but I ended up growing like uh, how I ended up growing with it, and how I evolved with the disease. So I ended up writing my essay on this. One problem with some essays like this is that it can turn into a sob story, which is not usually a good idea. So I try to stay away from that narrative. I ended up writing a narrative sort of personal statement, but I tried to make it as far away from a sob story as possible. So that was sort of my personal.
I think I love what you just said is take something that you were feeling challenged with, whether it was something that you were unfortunately born with or you contracted or whatever, right? And just flip the narrative around to show that as your strength. It's something that you own up, and something that you took it in your stride to make something out of it and not make it a sob story. I tell this to a lot of students that nobody is interested in hearing what atrocities you've been through, and how stones have been pelted at you, and how like your life's been a disaster. I get it, life's hard, nobody's life's easy, right? What seems apparently easy on the surface never is. Some people it's evidently hard. For some people, are who are fighting silent battles. You never know the real story for somebody. But I think what you should do is take that story and turn it around in a story of zest, in a story of zeal, in a story where you overcame obstacle, because people are more interested in knowing the end result, where you took something and made something out of that. And I'm so glad that you brought the subject up in terms of taking something that could have been a deterrent and flipping that around and saying, hey, you know what, this is my strength. This is not, I mean, so what if I have vitiligo? I am not defined by it. And I think those moments when you have, like, I have goosebumps right while I'm saying it. So those moments when you can put in an essay and it reflects your story, I think those are the ones that stand out generally overall. So great job with that, Anai. I have another question for you. Any mistakes that you did in this process, whether it's from 11th grade, 12th grade, any application errors, or just generally, like, general errors that you think your juniors should be made cognizant of so that they wouldn't do this?
Okay, so one of the errors I think I made is that I started a bit too late. I would have been much less stressed out if I started in grade 9, because I did not even know about the entire process. In grade 9, I sort of got to know about AP exams for the first time in after my class 10. So it would have been a much smoother process if I had begun earlier. I had to spend a lot of nights sleeping 3 or 4 hours every single day from class 11 to 12, because I had so much work left to do because of my extracurriculars and also my school academics. So one thing I would say is to start earlier. Also, another thing I would say is to spend a good to begin your essays in March or April or May or June, and not to wait till August before starting your Common App, because it gets very hectic around the time you have to submit for early applications. So I think I wrote my last Columbia essay on the day of submission itself. So it got very hectic at the end when I had to press the submit button. So those are the two things I would primarily say, is to manage your time well and to start early.
Perfect. And any last words for our viewers and listeners? It's been a fantastic podcast learning about your journey, but anything that you'd like to tell everybody who's going to listen to you right now, or, whenever, at some point in time, as it continues to stay on Spotify, on YouTube, and all of that?
Okay, so one thing I would like to say is that it does not matter what your board is, or what resources whether you have a counselor or whether you have some access to some resource. It is much more important how proactive you are, because you have the internet and you can actually scroll through Reddit and Google stuff, and you can actually find out a lot more information if you are proactive enough. Then whether you actually have whether you have a good enough school, or whether you have a counselor or anything like that. So if you are proactive enough, you can actually manage your way throughout the process, no matter what resources you have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anay. It was a pleasure interviewing you and knowing things from you. And I'm sure that, you are a testament to everybody who's out there at your school, otherwise, and across the world, who will be watching you on this podcast. And, I'm sure thanking you. What we'll also do is leave your Instagram handle, your email address, if you're okay with it, so that people can email to you with any issues, any doubts, anything. And obviously, probably doing a little research in Colombia once you go over there. But we wish you all the very best for your journey. And thank you so much once again for showing up on the podcast and taking out the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And everybody else, thank you again for tuning in. And we will come back very soon with the next episode of Pathways to the Ivies, exploring another subject, another student, another dimension to your college application journey. Hopefully, this episode has been useful, like we've tried for every other episode. Thank you so much.